She told me a demon made her cheat, and in that instant I realized the demon wasn't set up, the only one stealing from my family. March 5th, 2021. Atlanta, Georgia. A Friday drenched in a relentless drizzle that made every shadow creep longer, darker, more alive. I stepped into our house, keys tight in my hand, and the silence hit me like a hammer. No laughter from the kids, no radio hum, only the oven timer ticking, sharp, insistent like a heartbeat in the empty kitchen. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. On the counter lay a note, jagged handwriting scrawled in her familiar curve. It wasn't me, it was the demon. My chest tightened. I had seen betrayal before, but never so theatrically grotesque. Each word mocked me, daring me to question reality. Beneath it, crumpled tuition bills for Emma and Liam littered the countertop. March 1st, March 3rd, March 4th. Unpaid, ignored. Their education dangling while she blamed an invisible entity. I stepped further inside. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, distorted by the flickering lamp. Each floorboard groaned beneath my shoes, echoing like whispered warnings. Then a faint tap, wind brushing a window, or the house itself breathing. My pulse quickened. I didn't flinch. I was cataloging, counting, recording. My phone buzzed. Her message, I couldn't control it. He made me do it. He, the demon. I didn't reply. Not yet, because I had proof. Hotel receipts from March 2nd and 3rd downtown. Text messages thinly veiled as innocent chatter, and the crumpled tuition bills her negligence made tangible. I grabbed a receipt, embossed hotel logo, $342.57, paid in cash March 2nd. My fingers tightened, nearly tearing it. I slipped it into my drawer, underlining the date. Demons didn't pay tuition. She did. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I moved through the house. Cautious. The living room carpet crunched. Her coffee mug steamed faintly, lipstick smeared. Bills, bank statements, texts. All evidence of deception waiting to be aligned. The wind gusted again, rattling blinds like brittle bones. Above, the ceiling fan swayed, brushing shadows across the room. I froze. Footsteps? A whisper? Nothing, but anticipation thrummed through the air. She could deny, fabricate, blame, but each receipt, each crumpled bill, each time-stamped text pointed directly at her. I retrieved a blank ledger. Page by page, I logged tuition dates, hotel invoices, text excerpts. Each scratch of the pen was a heartbeat in the house, echoing against silence. Demons may be invisible, but lies leave a trail. A creak from the hallway, wind brushing the curtains. I froze, eyes darting. Nothing, yet the house seemed alive, aware, waiting for confrontation. I called my sister Lisa. Austin, she said. Steady and calm, document everything. Every receipt, every text, every claim. This is about the kids. Don't let theatrics fool you. Anchored by her voice, I felt control return. I lined up receipts, tuition slips, invoices on the desk, $342.57, $129.89, $1,205.40, Emma's and Liam's education. Shadows danced across the papers, flickering like warnings. The truth didn't sleep. At the doorway of the children's room, I paused. Liam and Emma slept, unaware of the storm above their heads. My chest ached. This betrayal wasn't just mine, it touched them. Yet resolve sharpened. If demons existed, they could start paying for daycare and tuition. I smirked. I sat at the desk, ledger open. Shadows stretched, twisted, hovered across pages. I didn't flinch. I had proof, timeline, resolve. The demon could keep excuses. Reality, law, and finances would bend to truth. I closed the ledger and tucked receipts safely. The house returned to uneasy calm. Storm outside subsided, but a different tempest brewed inside. Quiet, precise, unstoppable. The demon's excuse might scare some. Not me. I had the evidence, and she would realize soon. Ghosts don't pay tuition. A floorboard groaned behind me. The curtains fluttered. The house whispered. I smiled. I was ready. March 6, 2021. Atlanta, Georgia. Nights had become my prison. The house no longer felt familiar. It had become a stage for ghosts of decisions, whispers of lies. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust rattling the blinds, reminded me that betrayal was alive, persistent and watching. I paced through the living room late into the night, ledger open, pen in hand. Shadows flickered against the walls, twisting with the weak lamplight. I reviewed each piece of evidence again. Tuition bills, hotel receipts, text logs, even the small crumpled grocery slips I had tucked away. Each one confirmed the horror I already knew. She had manipulated our reality, blaming demons for her choices, while the financial and emotional consequences landed squarely on my shoulders. The children's tuition deadlines loomed like storm clouds. Emma's piano lessons, Liam's soccer league, school lunches, medical bills, everything was slipping. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and fury. I couldn't allow this chaos to continue. Yet confronting her directly would have been pointless. She had rehearsed every excuse, every haunted claim, like a performance designed to elicit guilt rather than accountability. I called our lawyer, a calm, precise woman named Marissa. Her voice grounded me. Document every interaction, she instructed. Every message, every claim. If she insists on blaming the supernatural, make her words work against her. I followed her instructions to the letter, ensuring that each demon claim became legal leverage instead of a distraction. Sleep became sporadic, fragmented by flashes of memory. Our family dinners, the children's laughter, the security I once felt. The house whispered at night. Floorboards groaned under imagined weight. The wind pressed against windows, faint tapping sounded from behind closed doors. Each sound was a reminder that silence could be as loud as screams. I started recording my observations in a notebook, detailing her patterns, the timing of her absences, the moments when she claimed possession or manipulation by some unseen force. I logged when she left the house, what she wore, how long she was gone, and any minor inconsistencies I could catch. By March 7th, I had a 3-page document, every detail painstakingly noted. The children began sensing the tension. Emma woke early on March 8th, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why is the house so quiet? And why do I feel scared?" Liam tugged my sleeve later that morning. "Is Mom angry again?" My stomach tightened. I could not let them shoulder the fear. I explained gently that everything was okay, that I was making sure our family was safe. Yet even as I spoke, the unease in the house was palpable, shadows clinging to corners, blinds rattling, wind whispering through cracks in the window frame. I started pacing nightly in front of the fireplace, reviewing my evidence, listening for any inconsistencies in her earlier claims. Flickering lights and floorboards groaning under my weight were my soundtrack. The house had become a silent accomplice to her deception, reflecting the tension in its every shiver. By March 9th, I had begun comparing bank statements with her text logs. She had withdrawn funds multiple times, citing minor emergencies, while the tuition payments remained unpaid. A hotel invoice from March 2nd still sat in the drawer, clearly indicating her downtown escapade. I underlined it again, imagining her demons paying the bill. But this was reality. I was the one documenting, the one keeping the children's future intact. I spent the early hours of March 10th reviewing the household accounts. Every withdrawal, every purchase, every expense now became part of a web, a map of betrayal she thought invisible. The shadows on the walls seemed to lean closer, as if urging me to continue, to trace every line, to leave no loose ends. Friends called, urging me to step back, to avoid confrontation, to preserve my sanity. But I knew stepping back meant allowing her manipulation to continue unchecked. I could not when the children's education, security, and emotional well-being were at stake. I meticulously documented each call, noting times, dates, and content. Every word she spoke about demons became a footnote in my ledger, a tool for eventual accountability. That night I sat alone in the kitchen, shadows stretching over tuition bills and hotel receipts. I allowed myself a single thought, the fear she had intended for me to feel, Helplessness, disbelief, confusion was now fuel. I would transform it into control, into evidence, into leverage. Her haunted theatrics would become her undoing. By the end of March 10th, I had a full timeline, hours, locations, receipts, statements, and the children's looming financial obligations. Each entry reinforced the same grim truth. The demon was just a cover for her deliberate manipulative actions. The house exhaled around me, each creak, each whisper, each flicker of light, a reminder that silence too tells a story. I closed my notebook and looked out the rain-streaked window. Emma and Liam slept soundly, unaware of the tension threading through our home. I clenched my jaw. The nights would continue to be long, shadowed, and tense. But this was the price of preparation, the cost of turning betrayal into actionable justice. I had the evidence. I had the timeline. And most importantly, I had resolve. The house sighed around me. Blinds rattled softly, wind pressed against the window panes, floorboards groaned under unseen weight. Shadows seemed to shift closer, whispering reminders that I was being watched. But I didn't flinch. I had started to map the lies, to turn fear into strategy. And in that silence, amidst the echoes of betrayal and the soft sound of a storm pressing against the walls, I whispered to myself the demons she blamed had no power here. Only her choices did. And those choices would soon cost her everything. Mid-March, 2021. Atlanta. The days had begun to blur into each other. Gray rain streaking the windows, floorboards groaning under invisible weight, and shadows lengthening into corners that seemed too dark to be natural. I spent my hours systematically piecing together a map of deceit that she thought invisible, that she believed only she could navigate. But every lie, every omission, every fabricated haunted claim left a trace, and I was determined to follow it. I spread the ledger across the dining table, each page meticulously numbered, each entry color-coded: blue for hotel invoices, red for tuition payments, black for text messages. Each line was a breadcrumb she had left behind, an unintentional guide for me. I traced my finger along the lines: March 2nd, $342.57, downtown hotel. March 3rd, supposed book club 30 miles away. March 4th, grocery shopping that never happened. Each inconsistency felt like a small, jagged knife, cutting through the fabric of what I had believed to be our shared life. The house seemed to pulse with the tension I carried. Shadows flickered across the walls as if the house itself was reacting, whispering secrets I had yet to uncover. A gust of wind rattled the blinds, echoing the whispers of the past weeks. The creaks, the footsteps that weren't there, the faint tapping on doors in empty rooms. Even the mundane sounds, the dripping faucet, the hum of the refrigerator, all seemed charged with a sinister energy. I pulled open my laptop and started comparing every piece of digital evidence. Text logs between her and the downtown friend. I scrolled slowly, noting timestamps: 9:14 p.m., 11:03 p.m., 12:47 a.m. Each message confirmed she was somewhere she claimed she wasn't. The language she used, casual and flippant, revealed the artifice. She thought she could manipulate with ghostly excuses, but her words betrayed her. A knock at the door startled me. I jumped, heart racing. Lisa stepped in, her eyes scanning the spread of receipts, invoices, and crumpled tuition bills. "Austin, every pattern matters," she said quietly, sitting beside me. We began cross-referencing our schedules against hers. Hotel invoices, credit card statements, car GPS logs, all aligned in a mosaic of deception. The private investigator I had hired sent over her preliminary report. He had followed her movements within legal limits, documenting everything: hotel stays, restaurant visits, times logged, faces spotted. I studied each photograph, each note noting the subtle tremor in her smile, the tension in her shoulders. Even when she believed she was performing for the imaginary demon, her body revealed the truth. I took out another crumpled tuition bill, March 1st, for Emma's violin lessons. I compared it with the payment history. Nothing had been paid, not even partial installments. Each unpaid bill, each missing receipt was another piece of leverage, another line connecting her lies. I highlighted it in the ledger, noting March 1st violation, financial neglect, evidence for legal proceedings. Night fell, and the house transformed into a different entity entirely. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, the blinds rattled, floorboards groaned. The creak of the stairs upstairs echoed like a heartbeat. I could almost hear the whispers of her demons, feigned and empty, trying to haunt me. But I didn't flinch. I let the sounds merge with my own focus, the meticulous mapping of deceit. By March 12th, I had a comprehensive timeline. Every withdrawal from joint accounts, every unexplained cash expenditure, every hotel stay, every claimed supernatural incident, all logged, categorized, and cross-referenced. My ledger had become a blueprint of betrayal. I could see patterns forming Monday evenings downtown, Thursday morning claims of possession, Friday's unexplained absences. The web was intricate, but no thread had escaped me. I paused for a moment and walked through the house. Liam and Emma were at school. The empty rooms echoed with quiet suspense. I listened for the subtle sounds, the tap of the heating system, wind scraping the blinds, the faint hum of a neighbor's dog, but my attention remained fixed on the patterns. Every anomaly reinforced what I already knew: the demons were fiction, the lies were real, and the consequences would be unavoidable. I set up a wall in the study with pushpins, string, and sticky notes. Blue threads for financial discrepancies, red for physical movements, yellow for digital communications. The board looked chaotic to anyone else, but I could see the map clearly. It was a spider web of accountability, a visual ledger of betrayal that left no room for doubt. March 13th arrived with an eerie calm, almost mocking. The morning rain pelted against the windows, the wind moaned through the eaves. I reviewed the ledger again, making notes for the upcoming legal consultations. The private investigator confirmed minor gaps, but nothing significant. Each shadow in the house, each flicker of light, each whisper of the wind seemed to urge me onward. The truth was near. That evening, I found myself sitting at the desk, staring at a hotel receipt from March 3rd, $289.10. Downtown Atlanta, paid in cash. I imagined her claiming the demon had made her take that trip. I chuckled quietly. If her supernatural scapegoat had a bank account, it could pay for every expense she neglected. But the reality was stark. The ledger was mine, the proof was mine, and her lies were trapped in ink, paper, and digital files. By the end of March 13th, I had completed the mapping, a full timeline of lies, absences, financial neglect, and fabricated hauntings. Every document, every crumpled tuition bill, every text message, every hotel receipt, every whispered excuse now converged into a single, undeniable truth. She had betrayed us. The demons were imaginary, the deceit was real, and the consequences would be legally, financially, and morally unavoidable. I leaned back, the shadows in the room stretching across the walls. Floorboards creaked. Wind rattled the blinds. The house seemed alive, anticipating the confrontation to come. I smiled. The mapping was complete. The web was woven, and soon every lie would unravel exactly as it should. Late March 2021. Atlanta. The house had begun to feel like a labyrinth of secrets, each corner hiding another thread of deceit she thought invisible. I moved through it cautiously, ledger in hand, receipts and text logs folded neatly beside me. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of light, every whispering wind against the blinds reminded me that the house itself seemed to bear witness. I had begun subtly exposing her lies, turning her theatrics into my advantage. Receipts started to appear in places she couldn't ignore. Emma's violin tuition slip on the dining table, Liam's soccer league invoice on her nightstand. Little reminders that her claims of possession, of being controlled by some demon, did not absolve her of responsibility. The first test came on March 16th. She returned from an afternoon out, claiming she had been banishing spirits at a friend's house. Her words were theatrically whispered, hesitant as if performing. I casually referenced a recent hotel receipt from downtown Atlanta, March 12th, $289.10, and watched her face tighten. She stumbled, fumbling for a response. The shadows seemed to stretch, almost leaning toward her, highlighting the fissures her lies had created. I monitored the joint accounts closely. Every withdrawal, every unusual charge became part of the invisible web I was weaving. By March 17th, I had installed alerts on both our phones. Any new transaction, any new message, any unexplained absence triggered an immediate record in the ledger. It was meticulous, almost surgical. Each micro detail, her hesitation when asked about bills, the flutter of her eyelashes, the way she avoided eye contact, became proof layered over the documented evidence. The private investigator delivered minor updates daily. Hotel stays, restaurant outings, small purchases, all legally documented. I merged these reports with my own ledger, each line color-coded and cross-referenced. By March 18th, the ledger resembled a complex map, a spider web connecting dates, amounts, locations, and fabricated claims of demons. I could follow a single thread and see the entire pattern unfold, unbroken, unarguable. Short suspense beats became routine. Floorboards groaned unexpectedly, shadows stretched across walls, flickering with the weak lamplight. Curtains fluttered in rooms where no draft should reach. Each sound heightened the tension, reminding me that while she may have been playing a ghostly act, the reality, the financial reality, the parental responsibility was fully within my control. I began to weave social pressure into the web. Subtle mentions to neighbors of her erratic behavior, casual, innocuous remarks at the grocery store. "Oh, you'll never guess what she claimed this time." Eyes widened. Whispers circulated. She noticed the small shifts in social energy. Her tension increased. Her steps grew measured, and her glances at me became flickers of panic. I never confronted her directly. Control came from observation, documentation, and subtle exposure. By March 20th, I had prepared legal letters outlining overdue tuition payments, referencing exact amounts: Emma's $1,205.40 violin lessons, Liam's $342.57, soccer registration March 5th and March 12th. Each line included corresponding text excerpts and receipts, carefully cross-referenced. The letters would serve as official documentation for any court proceedings, each subtly undermining her supernatural excuses. The house itself seemed complicit in this stagecraft. Floorboards creaked as I walked from the living room to the office. Shadows pooled and flickered as if performing for me alone. The wind pressed against the windows. A faint whistle that made my skin prickle. I imagined her imaginary demons watching, powerless, while I traced every path of her deception. I carefully planted small inconsistencies to test her responses. A hotel invoice left conspicuously on the counter. A tuition receipt slid into her purse when she wasn't looking. Casual references to her digital activity and conversation. Each micro-manipulation was legal, subtle, invisible to outsiders, but glaringly obvious to me and my legal team. Her supernatural claims, which once gave her confidence, now faltered under scrutiny. By March 22nd, I had compiled over 30 entries of documented inconsistencies, supported by receipts, invoices, text logs, and PI observations. Each entry meticulously dated, location-specific, and cross-referenced. Her fabricated ghostly influences became trapped in this web of proof. Every attempt to invoke demons in conversation or excuse negligence was now paired with factual evidence, ready to be presented legally. The tension in the house escalated. She moved through rooms like a shadow herself, glancing at receipts, avoiding eye contact, muttering under her breath about spirits. The blinds rattled as if mocking her. Floorboards groaned with the weight of impending exposure. Each sound, each flicker of shadow was a subtle reminder that the web was closing in. By March 24th, I had integrated every ledger entry, PI report, hotel invoice, bank statement, and crumpled tuition bill into a master file. The invisible web was complete. Evidence, behavioral observation, financial documentation, and minor social pressure all converging toward one point. Her supernatural excuses, once a shield, had become liabilities. The house whispered around me, every creak, flicker, and wind gust a silent confirmation. Her lies were mapped, her deceit contained, and her accountability inevitable. I sat back at the desk that evening, shadows pooling around me, wind whistling faintly through cracks, floorboards groaning under imaginary weight. The web was complete, invisible to anyone but me, yet airtight, undeniable, and ready to convert every whispered excuse into documented truth. The house seemed to exhale with quiet satisfaction. The demon she blamed had no power here, only her choices did, and the consequences, meticulously documented and carefully mapped, were unavoidable. Early April 2021. Atlanta. The air had thickened with tension. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Wind pressed insistently against window panes, and the house seemed almost sentient, vibrating with the accumulated weight of lies. I had begun to feel a strange, grim satisfaction. The theater of her demons, once a source of manipulation, was now crumbling under the weight of documented reality. The private investigator delivered his complete set of reports that morning. Text logs, invoices, hotel records, photographs, GPS confirmations, all legally obtained, meticulously organized, and time-stamped. I laid them across the desk, cross-referencing every entry with my own ledger. Her web of supernatural excuses had become a collection of proof, a tool to ensure accountability. Every fabricated possession, every whispered claim of control, now reinforced my leverage. I watched her closely that evening. Shadows flickered over the walls, blinds rattled, floorboards groaned beneath invisible weight. She moved through the house like a wraith, hesitant, measured, nervous. Her eyes darted toward receipts left strategically on the kitchen counter. Tuition bills placed subtly in her bag, hotel invoices casually referenced in conversation. Each minor tremor in her posture, every hesitant glance was a micro clue. The horror she tried to project had turned back on her. I began preparing affidavits. Each document meticulously detailed the timeline of her absences, expenditures, and fabricated claims of supernatural influence. March 2nd, $342.57 downtown hotel. March 3rd, claimed book club at impossible distance. Tuition payments for Emma, $1,205.40. For Liam, $342.57 unpaid. Every affidavit tied to receipts, text logs, and photographic evidence. The web was airtight. Financial controls were tightened. Joint accounts monitored, credit lines restricted. The illusion of freedom she had enjoyed while blaming demons was now replaced by strict legal oversight. I did not need confrontation. The structure itself became leverage. Each step she took, each excuse she offered was recorded, documented, and mapped. Her haunting stories, once her shield, now worked against her. By April 5th, I had reviewed every hotel receipt and every text exchange multiple times. Even the smallest detail mattered, the way she phrased messages, timestamps that contradicted claimed locations, minor hotel charges unnoticed until cross-referenced with account withdrawals. Each inconsistency became a tether pulling her back toward accountability. The house itself seemed complicit. Shadows stretched across walls as I moved through rooms, wind pressed against window panes with faint whistles, and the floorboards groaned intermittently. Each ambient noise underscored her panic. I caught her glancing nervously at corners where no one stood, stammering when trying to justify minor charges, hesitating mid-sentence. The ghosts she imagined were trapped in my web of evidence, powerless, while her real-world leverage slipped away. I began subtle social manipulation too, casual mentions to neighbors about her strange, erratic behavior, veiled references to her recent absences. Not confrontation, just observation and implication. Eyes widened, whispers circulated, and her awareness of being watched subtly increased. Panic flickered across her expressions, reinforcing the leverage I already held through documentation. Every evening I returned to the ledger, cross-referencing receipts, bank statements, invoices, and PI updates. The entries were precise, color-coded, and layered. Hotel charges in blue, tuition payments in red, text logs in black. I could trace every step, every choice, every fabricated supernatural incident to concrete evidence. The tension became almost unbearable for her. By April 7th, I noticed micro-reactions I had been anticipating. Slight tremors in her hands when she realized I had moved a receipt into the bedroom. Hesitation in her voice when referencing alleged hauntings. nervous glances toward the study where my ledger was always open. She was aware of the trap, but powerless to escape it. I leaned back in my chair one evening, watching her attempt to navigate the house without triggering any further evidence. The shadows seemed to mirror her anxiety, flickering at corners, stretching unnaturally. The wind whistled through the cracked window, a constant reminder of the house's silent testimony. The horror she had tried to fabricate to manipulate me had become my tool, each haunting claim a tether tightening around her accountability. By April 10th, I had compiled over 50 verified entries of evidence, each meticulously documented and cross-referenced. Affidavits prepared, receipts cataloged, PI reports aligned with ledger notes. Her demons had no jurisdiction here. Only her choices, recorded and legally bound, carried weight. I placed a final receipt, March 12th, downtown hotel, $289.10, prominently on the desk, just where she would see it upon entering the study. Her eyes fell on it immediately. A flicker of panic crossed her face. A stammer, a hesitant glance toward the ledger. The invisible web had done its work. She realized every lie, every fabricated possession, every excuse had been mapped, recorded, and prepared for the inevitable. The house exhaled around me. Floorboards groaned under imagined weight. Shadows flickered and wind whispered faintly. Yet I did not flinch. The web was complete, leverage absolute. The demon she blamed had no power. Her fabricated horrors were now mine to command, legally, financially, and morally. And in that quiet, I understood the stark truth: horror, when harnessed correctly, becomes leverage. Shadows, whispers, and staged fear were powerless without documentation, evidence, and strategic patience. I smiled. She had created her own undoing, and I had been ready, waiting, mapping, and controlling every thread. The invisible web was now visible in its consequences. Every financial misstep, every fabricated haunting, every lie had been catalogued. The stage was set. The final act, public exposure and accountability, was approaching. And when it arrived, there would be no excuses, no demons, only her choices, fully mapped, fully exposed, fully leveraged. Mid-April, 2021, Atlanta. The tension in the house had become almost tangible, pressing against my chest like the weight of the storm outside. The wind whistled through the eaves, floorboards groaned under unseen pressure, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls. My wife had begun to panic. The careful composure she had maintained was fraying, and every small inconsistency I had documented began to surface in her behavior. The children sensed it first. Emma woke early on April 14th, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why is the house so quiet? And why does it feel scary?" Liam tugged at my sleeve later, whispering, "Is Mom mad again?" I crouched to their level, forcing calm into my voice. "Everything's okay," I said. "I'm making sure our family is safe, that's all." Their eyes searched mine, trust intact but fear lingering. I could not allow the shadow of her manipulation to touch them beyond necessity. Meanwhile, her supernatural claims escalated. She whispered about demons, claimed possession, blamed unseen forces for every misstep. But now her words became a trap rather than protection. I documented everything meticulously. Every phrase she muttered, every stammer, every gesture became evidence of intentional deceit rather than supernatural interference. By April 15th, I had compiled over 40 separate verbal claims, all cross-referenced with financial and physical evidence: hotel invoices, tuition bills, text logs, bank withdrawals. Short suspense beats punctuated every day. Floorboards groaned when she moved. Shadows pooled unnaturally on the walls. The blinds rattled, wind whispered faintly through cracks in the windows. Each micro-event mirrored her anxiety. She moved through the house like a wraith, checking corners, glancing toward receipts, avoiding eye contact, her voice trembling when referencing her fabricated hauntings. I monitored joint accounts closely. Every withdrawal she attempted, every small purchase she claimed as emergency, was immediately logged and cross-referenced. Text alerts flagged inconsistencies. Each minor attempt to invoke a demon excuse now triggered a recorded note in the ledger. Her imagined protection was now her vulnerability. On April 16th, I tested the leverage subtly. I left a tuition bill for Emma's violin lessons, $1,205.40. On the dining table, I placed Liam's soccer registration, $342.57 in her purse. Later, during a casual conversation, I referenced a hotel invoice from March 12th, downtown Atlanta, $289.10. Her reaction was immediate. A slight tremor in her hands, hesitation in her voice, eyes darting toward the ledger. Micro reactions were my confirmation. The invisible web had her cornered. By April 17th, I began hinting at legal exposure in controlled, indirect ways. A phrase here, the affidavit we reviewed. A subtle question there, did you see the updated ledger? Each mention caused her micro expressions to shift, panic barely contained. Shadows seemed to lean closer, floorboards groaned, wind pressed against windows, and curtains fluttered like anxious breaths. Her imagined demons had no power here. Only her choices remained visible. I expanded my mapping. Hotel stays, text messages, financial withdrawals, and supernatural claims now converged into a single clear narrative. Each entry included exact dates, amounts, and cross-references. March 2nd, $342.57 downtown hotel. March 3rd, claimed book club, impossible distance. Tuition payments overdue. Each line reinforced the evidence. Every fabricated excuse was trapped in its contradiction. By April 18th, I could see the psychological strain taking hold. She moved with caution, whispered to herself, avoided rooms where receipts or the ledger might be visible. Her eyes flicked repeatedly toward the office where every detail was documented. The wind whistled through the blinds, floorboards creaked under unseen weight, and shadows pooled at corners as if watching her panic. Each ambient cue heightened the tension, turning the house into a theater of psychological exposure. I maintained detailed logs of her movements and reactions. April 19th, 6:42 p.m. She glanced at the ledger mid-conversation. April 20th, 8:13 a.m. She attempted to redirect a discussion about tuition payments, hesitated, then stammered. April 21st, 7:29 p.m. She touched a crumpled hotel receipt, as if unconsciously acknowledging her guilt. Each moment documented, time-stamped, and ready for legal presentation. By the end of April 21st, the web of proof was airtight. Her supernatural stories, once a shield, were now the mechanism for her own exposure. I could see the mounting fear in her gestures, the subtle stammer in her voice, the evasive glances toward the office. Every whisper about demons had become a marker of guilt. The house itself, the shadows, the floorboards, the wind, seemed to bear witness, accentuating the inevitability of her accountability. I sat alone in the office late that night, shadows pooling across the ledger, wind whistling through cracked windows, floorboards creaking under imagined weight. I reviewed the full timeline of financial neglect, fabricated hauntings, hotel stays, and text logs. Every thread was connected, every detail accounted for. The demon she invoked had no jurisdiction here. Only her actions mattered. And in that quiet, shadowed house, I realized the full power of the leverage I had built. Horror, once her shield, had become my tool. Every claim of possession, every whispered excuse, every trembling gesture was now proof. The stage was set. Exposure was inevitable, and when the confrontation arrived, there would be no denial, no demons, only documented reality and full accountability. May 5th, 2021. Fulton County Courthouse, Atlanta, Georgia. The morning air was crisp, tinged with anticipation. I walked through the grand oak doors, my hands steady, though my chest throbbed with the weight of months' accumulation. Months of shadows, whispered lies, and meticulous documentation. The house, the ledger, every crumpled tuition bill, every hotel receipt, every text log had led to this moment. Every fabricated demon, every whispered excuse was about to face reality. I took a seat at the plaintiff's table. My sister Lisa sat beside me, her presence grounding, a silent witness to both betrayal and strategy. Our lawyer Marissa, a composed, sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, reviewed the case binder one last time. Every affidavit, every receipt, every ledger entry neatly arranged. She nodded subtly, reassuring me. This was not just about money, this was about exposing deception, reclaiming accountability, and ensuring our children's future. The courtroom filled. Observers whispered quietly, shifting their weight on polished wooden benches. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for meticulous fairness, entered. The gavel's crack reverberated like a starting gun. I inhaled sharply, aware that every word, every gesture, every pause would carry weight. The wife entered moments later. Her eyes darted across the room, lingering briefly on the evidence I had subtly made visible on the table: tuition bills, hotel receipts, a neatly organized ledger. Her posture stiffened, a micro-expression of panic crossing her face. She tried to summon composure, whispering, I, I was possessed. It wasn't me. Her voice trembled despite the attempt. Marissa stood and began with opening statements. Your Honor, the evidence presented here is clear, documented, and corroborated. The defendant claims supernatural interference for financial neglect, but all evidence indicates deliberate and repeated actions in violation of financial and parental responsibility. She gestured toward the ledger and accompanying documents. Each invoice, receipt, and communication has been verified, with timelines cross-referenced and corroborated by a private investigator operating within legal bounds. I watched my wife closely as Marissa spoke. Shadows pooled in the corners of the courtroom, the flickering sunlight through the blinds accentuating every tension line on her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she attempted to hold a folder. She opened her mouth to protest, to invoke the demons, but Marissa anticipated. Any claims of possession are noted in her statements, but cross-referenced against verifiable locations and financial records, they are inconsistent and unsupported. The cross-examination began. Miss Good Marissa addressed her calmly. On March 2nd, you were at a hotel downtown. Paid in cash, correct? My wife faltered. Yes. A pause, hesitation. I. Marissa continued. And according to text messages, you were simultaneously claiming to be at a book club 30 miles away. How do you reconcile these statements? Her voice wavered. The demon, she glanced toward me, eyes wide as if seeking rescue from an invisible savior. But there was none. Every ledger entry, every receipt, every affidavit sat between us like a wall. I could feel the tension radiate off her, the shadows in the room almost mocking the futility of her excuses. Marissa guided the questioning expertly, exposing inconsistencies with precision. Your hotel receipt for March 12th, $289.10, placed you downtown at 10:45 p.m. Yet you told Mr. Austin you were at home caring for the children. How is that possible? My wife's eyes flicked to the ledger, then to the receipts displayed on the table. Panic surged, and she muttered, I lost track. I didn't. The judge leaned forward slightly. Miss, are you admitting that these documented events occurred regardless of supernatural influence? The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. Shadows pooled along the walls like dark spectators. She swallowed, voice breaking. Yes, I guess. Marissa continued systematically, layering evidence and psychological observation. She presented text logs with exact timestamps, hotel invoices with precise amounts, tuition bills crumpled but verifiable, and PI photographs corroborating absence from claimed locations. Each piece reinforced the same narrative. Deception, not demon possession, dictated the events. I noticed subtle cues in my wife's behavior. Hesitation in her voice, trembling hands, darting eyes, and micro-expressions betraying panic. Her supernatural defenses were collapsing under scrutiny. Each lie she had built into a story of possession was now an anchor, pulling her toward legal and financial accountability. By mid-afternoon, the presentation of evidence was complete. Marissa summarized, Your Honor, the plaintiff has presented a comprehensive record of financial neglect, misrepresentation, and deception. Each element has been verified, cross-referenced, and documented. The defendant's claims of supernatural interference are unsupported by evidence and contradicted by verified records. Justice and accountability demand restitution and compliance with parental obligations. The judge nodded, reviewing the evidence. Shadows from the high windows flickered across the bench as if the room itself leaned in to observe the inevitable. Given the documentation, verified evidence, and witness testimony, the judge said finally, financial restitution is mandated. Supernatural claims are deemed invalid. The defendant is ordered to pay all overdue tuition and associated expenses for the children, effective immediately. A soft gasp echoed from the gallery. I felt a tightness in my chest, the culmination of months of meticulous work, late nights, and patient mapping. Relief washed over me, tempered by the lingering shadow of betrayal. The court had spoken. Horror had been harnessed as leverage, deception laid bare, and justice delivered. As we left the courtroom, I glanced back. My wife's expression was a mixture of disbelief and resignation. Her imagined demons were powerless, her excuses invalidated. The shadows of the past still lingered in the corners of the building, but now they bore witness to truth, not deception. That evening, as we returned home, I placed the ledger and receipts back in the study. The wind pressed faintly against the windows. Floorboards groaned, shadows stretched along walls. But now each element of the house's ambient tension reminded me of triumph rather than fear. The children's tuition was secured, accountability established, and the web of deception had been dismantled publicly, legally, and definitively. I allowed myself a quiet moment, staring at the pool of shadow in the office corners. The horror she had invoked to manipulate me had become my tool. Every claim of demonic possession, every whispered excuse had been converted into evidence and leverage. The stage was complete, and when the curtain fell, the truth stood unflinching, unassailable, and exacting in its clarity. I exhaled, feeling the weight of months lift slightly. The courtroom exorcism was over. Justice, meticulously documented and executed, had reclaimed the children's future, and in the quiet with shadows pooling silently around me, I understood horror when harnessed with patience and precision can become an instrument of truth and deception, no matter how theatrically staged, cannot withstand the weight of evidence. May 6, 2021. Atlanta. The courtroom verdict had left a strange quiet in the house. Shadows still lingering in corners, floorboards groaning faintly, and the wind whispering through the cracks of the windows. But now the tension was different. Not the oppressive dread of betrayal, but the steady, deliberate calm of regained control. I began by restoring financial stability. Tuition payments for Emma's violin lessons, $1,205.40, and Liam's soccer registration, $342.57, were secured immediately. Joint accounts were monitored carefully, credit lines restructured to prevent future misuse. Each step, though mundane, carried the weight of months of meticulous preparation, every detail accounted for, every previous oversight corrected. The children's future was no longer dangling in the air, suspended by deception. The house responded. Shadows no longer stretched with malevolence. They simply moved with the rhythm of routine. The creaks in the floorboards sounded less like warnings and more like the settling of a home returning to equilibrium. I walked from room to room, checking that receipts, invoices, and ledger entries were properly filed, that all evidence remained secure for potential follow-up legal confirmations. The invisible web of proof I had built now functioned as a protective structure rather than a weapon. Emma noticed it first. She peeked around the doorway one morning, eyes wide, as I carefully organized her school paperwork. "Daddy, it feels different," she said softly. Liam nodded in agreement. "Yeah, the house feels calm," I smiled, feeling a quiet warmth I hadn't experienced in weeks. Restoration wasn't just about finances, it was about returning a sense of security to the children. I continued monitoring compliance, ensuring my wife adhered to financial obligations. Each payment she made was verified against receipts and ledger entries. April had taught her that supernatural excuses held no power against documentation, and every transaction reinforced that lesson. Shadows flickered occasionally. Floorboards groaned faintly, but I had trained my perception to read these ambient cues as markers, not threats. The house itself became a silent ally in maintaining accountability. Neighbors began to notice subtle changes too. Casual comments, hushed whispers about her erratic behavior, and the visible presence of organized documentation created a social environment where manipulation was difficult. She was aware of being observed, subtly constrained by the invisible pressure of community scrutiny. The psychological tension that had once empowered her claims of demons now acted as a reinforcing agent for compliance. I checked the children's educational schedule daily. Each tuition payment, music lesson, and sports activity was verified, recorded, and reconciled. Ledger entries were updated meticulously, ensuring that no discrepancies would arise. This diligence, though time-consuming, solidified a foundation of accountability that could withstand any future attempts at evasion or excuse. Evening routines became structured and calm. Shadows moved predictably. Wind whispered faintly but consistently through the same cracks. Floorboards creaked in familiar sequences. Each ambient element of the house that had once amplified fear now reinforced order. I could finally breathe, knowing that the children's lives were no longer subject to manipulation or neglect. By May 8th, social confirmation had strengthened. Casual interactions with neighbors confirmed awareness of her exposure, subtly discouraging any further attempts at manipulation. My wife's demeanor had shifted, hesitant, controlled, constrained. Micro-expressions betrayed a recognition that accountability was no longer negotiable. Each subtle glance toward the ledger, each pause when discussing financial matters, confirmed that the invisible web I had constructed remained effective. I maintained nightly reviews. Each receipt, invoice, text log, and ledger entry was revisited. Shadows flickered across walls, floorboards groaned under the weight of old storm memories, and wind whistled faintly. These ambient reminders were no longer oppressive, but guiding, reinforcing the structure I had established. Every detail was cross-referenced and confirmed. Every thread of past deception had been accounted for. By May 10th, I felt a profound sense of control. Tuition restored, household accounts secured, and the children's future stabilized. The house, once a theater for anxiety and fear, now reflected order. Shadows, faint sounds, and the occasional floorboard groan acted as a rhythm of continuity, reminders of lessons learned rather than harbingers of manipulation. The web of evidence had transitioned from a weapon of leverage to a shield of protection. I paused in the living room, watching Emma and Liam play quietly. Their laughter, soft and unburdened, was a stark contrast to the months of tension. The subtle ambient cues, the wind's faint whistle, shadows pooling harmlessly in corners, floorboards creaking predictably, reminded me of the journey we had endured. Every deceptive claim, every haunted excuse, every micro-reaction had been addressed, documented, and corrected. The house exhaled around me. Shadows softened, wind settled, floorboards relaxed. Restoration was not only tangible but atmospheric. The invisible web I had constructed had enforced compliance, secured accountability, and reinstated stability. Horror had been converted into order, fear into clarity, and deception into enforceable reality. As I returned the final ledger to its safe place, receipts filed and affidavits archived, I reflected on the months that had passed. The haunted stories she invoked were powerless. Every move I had made, every observation, every note, every subtle pressure had contributed to the restoration of order. The children were safe. Accountability was absolute, and the house, silent and shadowed, bore witness to the equilibrium now established. Mid-May 2021. Atlanta. The courtroom orders had been executed, tuition payments verified, and household finances secured. The children's future, once dangling precariously in the wake of her deception, was now fully protected. The house, still shadowed in the corners but now quiet, felt different, anchored, grounded, restored. I reviewed every payment confirmation. Emma's violin lessons, Liam's soccer registration, school lunches, and extracurricular fees all accounted for. Each deposit, each transfer, each receipt meticulously logged in the ledger. No gaps, no ambiguity. The evidence I had gathered for months was now fully validated in real life. Every bill paid, every invoice reconciled, was a tangible manifestation of justice. My wife's presence in the house had shifted dramatically. The once confident claims of demonic interference had eroded entirely. Every micro-expression, every hesitation in conversation, reflected her understanding that supernatural excuses could no longer shield her from consequences. She moved cautiously, avoiding direct eye contact, her hands trembling when handling receipts or letters from the children's school. I continued to monitor her compliance with the court orders. Each financial obligation, tuition payments, extracurricular fees, overdue bills was verified immediately upon execution. Any discrepancy was logged and corrected. The invisible web of oversight I had built ensured that deception had no foothold. Each action she attempted, once justified by demons, now faced scrutiny and accountability. The ambient tension in the house remained subtle but persistent. Shadows flickered lightly against walls, floorboards creaked under weightless footsteps, and the wind pressed faintly against window panes. These micro-events served as reminders that while the horror of her deception had passed, vigilance remained necessary. The children, however, sensed stability. Emma hummed softly while arranging her music sheets. Liam kicked a soccer ball in the hallway, unburdened by fear. Neighbors continued to observe quietly. Casual interactions, subtle awareness of her prior manipulation, reinforced her compliance. Social pressure, though understated, acted in conjunction with documented evidence to maintain order. Her reactions, hesitation, cautious speech, measured movements confirmed the effectiveness of both legal and social accountability. I revisited the ledger late one evening, shadows pooling across its pages, wind whispering through the cracks, floorboards groaning faintly. Each entry, from hotel receipts to tuition bills, text logs to affidavits, confirmed a completed narrative of justice. Her supernatural claims had been systematically dismantled, converted into documented proof of neglect and deceit. Every fabricated excuse had been exposed, and every consequence enforced. The children's safety was paramount. I verified each of their activities, payments, and school commitments daily. Emma's recital fees, Liam's sports league subscriptions, school supply purchases, all meticulously cross-referenced with bank statements, receipts, and court orders. Restoration extended beyond finances. It included emotional stability, a predictable routine, and the quiet assurance that deception no longer dictated their lives. By mid-May, her attempts at manipulation had ceased entirely. Any conversation regarding finances or responsibility was met with compliance, her micro-behaviors betraying apprehension. Shadows in the corners of the house no longer carried menace. They merely accentuated the routine stability I had reestablished. Floorboards creaked in predictable ways, wind whispered consistently through familiar cracks, and every ambient cue reinforced the presence of order. I reflected on the culmination of months of meticulous work. Evidence, patience, and strategic observation had transformed betrayal into accountability. The demons she had invoked could not shield her from legal, financial, and moral consequences. Justice had been delivered, measured, and precise. Every receipt, every invoice, every ledger entry served as proof of both her choices and my diligence. Even small microbeats of daily life confirmed the restoration. A tuition payment deposited, a text acknowledgement from the school, a nod from Emma or Liam, each action reinforced the equilibrium. Her previous attempts to manipulate reality through supernatural claims were nullified, her authority to impose fear effectively removed. Shadows, wind, and creaks no longer signaled dread but the quiet presence of restored order. The realization settled quietly within me. Horror, deception, and betrayal had all been harnessed strategically. Every fabricated demon, every whispered excuse, every micro-expression of panic had been cataloged, leveraged, and converted into enforceable accountability. The children's education was secure. Household finances were stable. Social pressure ensured ongoing compliance, and her own actions, meticulously documented, ensured she could never evade the consequences of her choices. I exhaled, letting the weight of months lift slightly. The demon had no power. Her lies, meticulously mapped and exposed, had yielded justice. Shadows flickered softly against the walls, wind whispered faintly, floorboards groaned predictably, But for the first time in months, the house felt safe, ordered, and ready to move beyond fear. Justice delivered through patient, strategic, and precise action had reclaimed not just the children's future but the integrity of our home. Her supernatural claims had been dismantled, replaced with tangible accountability, and the lingering horror of betrayal had been transformed into enforceable truth. And in the quiet, shadowed corners of the house, I understood the full measure of what had been achieved: measured revenge, justice delivered, and a future secured. The demon had been nothing. Only her choices had mattered, and they had been fully accounted for. May 15th, 2021. Atlanta. Spring had arrived fully, but the garden was quiet, almost contemplative. I stepped onto the soft grass, dew dampening my shoes, and sat on the wrought iron bench beneath the old magnolia tree. The house behind me, once a theater of betrayal and whispered demons, now stood in quiet order. Shadows from the late afternoon sun pooled gently, stretching across flower beds that had once felt ominous in the house's tense interior. I held the ledger in my lap, pages neatly folded, receipts and affidavits stacked beside me. Every hotel invoice, every crumpled tuition bill, every documented text, every observation from the private investigator, each piece had played its part in dismantling deception. The months of monitoring, mapping, and legal maneuvering were over. The demon she had blamed so theatrically had been nothing more than a mask for deliberate choices. The garden seemed to breathe around me. The soft rustling of leaves, the faint whisper of wind, and distant bird calls contrasted sharply with the haunted nights of March and April. Floorboards had groaned with tension, shadows had flickered ominously, blinds had rattled with minor storms. Here in the open air, the ambient horror was replaced by clarity. Even the subtle scent of magnolia blossoms carried a strange serenity after months of betrayal. I reflected on the children. Emma ran ahead, collecting small petals, her laughter light and unburdened. Liam kicked a soccer ball along the lawn, carefree. The house behind them was no longer a stage for fear. It was a monument to accountability. The invisible web I had constructed, receipts, invoices, affidavits, and behavioral observations, had secured not only finances but emotional stability. Each entry had ensured that her supernatural excuses could no longer disrupt their lives. I opened the ledger and revisited the final entries. March 12th. Downtown Hotel, $289.10. March 2nd, $342.57. Tuition payments, $1,205.40. For Emma, $342.57 for Liam. Each number, once a source of dread, now represented clarity, justice, and enforced responsibility. Every micro-reaction I had documented, every shadow and whisper that had accompanied her deceit, was proof of deliberate manipulation transformed into evidence. The wind stirred faintly, lifting loose pages from the bench. I tucked them carefully back into their stack. Months of tension had taught me that even small oversights could unravel accountability. The house, shadows, and ambient cues had been my allies, amplifying her panic and ensuring compliance. Now, in the calm of the garden, their roles shifted. They became witnesses to resolution rather than instruments of suspense. I let my gaze drift across the flower beds. The roses were budding, the magnolia blossoms falling gently onto the path, petals scattered like reminders of past struggles. Each shadow cast by the late afternoon sun seemed symbolic, proof that light follows darkness, clarity follows deception. The ledger in my hands had been my guide, each page a marker of calculated patience and strategic observation. I thought of my wife, her supernatural claims, and the subtle panic I had observed. Shadows, trembling gestures, hesitant glances, all once amplified by the ambient tension in the house, had become indicators of leverage, now neutralized by enforced accountability. The horror she had tried to invoke had transformed entirely. No longer a weapon for her, no longer a burden for me, but a reminder of lessons learned. Emma ran back, holding a small cluster of petals. "Look, Daddy," she said, smiling. "They're all for you." Liam followed, handing me the soccer ball. I accepted both gestures, noting the innocence and trust restored. The garden had become a stage for reflection, a space where the past could be examined without fear, where the consequences of deception could be observed calmly, and where justice once executed could breathe. I closed the ledger, pages neatly stacked, receipts secured, affidavits archived. Every documented moment of betrayal had been accounted for. Shadows shifted as the sun lowered, wind stirred the trees, floorboards in the distant house creaked predictably. The ambient environment was no longer threatening. It was a subtle reminder of the journey proof that vigilance, patience, and precise action had restored equilibrium. As the children played, I reflected on the lessons embedded in these months. Deception, no matter how theatrically staged, leaves a trace. Supernatural excuses, no matter how convincingly presented, cannot withstand documented evidence. Patience, observation, and meticulous record keeping had converted horror into leverage, betrayal into accountability, and fear into enforced order. I exhaled, letting the weight of months lift. Shadows softened, the wind whispered gently, the garden held its quiet rhythm. Justice had been delivered, accountability enforced, and the children's future secured. I understood fully now. Horror had served its purpose, but truth and action had reclaimed everything. And in the calm of the magnolia tree's shade, I thought with quiet clarity, "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." Late May 2021, Atlanta. The courtroom's verdict had settled, but life outside the house carried a new kind of tension. Rumors swirled quietly among neighbors and acquaintances, whispers of her failed manipulations, her supernatural theatrics, and the courtroom outcome traveled in hushed tones. The irony of her situation wasn't lost on me. The demons she had invoked to evade responsibility had become the very proof of her accountability. I watched from the study window as she moved through errands, always cautious, measured, aware that every gesture, every interaction could be scrutinized. Even casual neighbors observed her subtle panic, hesitation when handling receipts, micro-expressions betraying unease, the careful avoidance of topics previously used for supernatural excuses. Every action reinforced the web I had constructed, now visible in social context. The children thrived. Emma hummed through violin practice. Liam kicked a soccer ball in the yard, their laughter untouched by deception. The garden and house remained steady, shadows and ambient cues merely reminders of lessons learned. I allowed a small, wry smile. Justice had extended beyond legal documents. Social perception itself had become a silent enforcer. Her attempts to manipulate again were met with polite observation, quiet correction, and subtle accountability. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of symmetry. The same theatrical horror she had wielded now defined her public exposure. And I, watching it unfold, felt the satisfaction of measured, irrefutable justice. Late May 2021, Atlanta. Weeks after the courtroom, the full measure of consequences settled over her like a shadow she could no longer evade. Social circles whispered quietly but decisively. Her friends hesitated before inviting her to gatherings. Subtle glances and hushed remarks carried the weight of her prior manipulations. The demons she had invoked now existed only in public perception, mocking her, exposing her, confirming her accountability. I observed from a distance, ledger closed, receipts filed, affidavits archived. The children were secure. Emma practiced her violin without interruption. Liam's soccer games continued seamlessly. The house, once a theater of suspense, now hummed with routine, shadows merely stretching naturally in the late afternoon light. Ambient sounds, the wind's soft whistle, floorboards settling, reminded me of the journey we had endured. She moved carefully through the world now, every step measured, every gesture subtly constrained. Attempts at manipulation were curtailed by legal, financial, and social frameworks. Her supernatural claims, once theatrically wielded, were now a source of irony, a public record of her failed schemes. Sitting quietly in the garden beneath the magnolia tree, I reflected on the months of betrayal, fear, and measured strategy. The horror, the deception, the whispered excuses, all had been transformed into evidence, accountability, and restoration. And I knew with absolute clarity you didn't lose me, you gave me away. Shadows lingered, wind whispered, and the house exhaled in final quiet approval of justice served.